never eat that garbage again.
In my house, nobody eats processed meats anymore, especially not my grandchildren. Don't let your children and grandchildren eat this junk.
That packet of ham in your fridge, the one you didn't even put in a container, it came ready like that. Yeah, that one. Most Australians don't think twice about it. Breakfast, sandwiches, kids' lunches, it's not treated like processed food, it's treated like food. Here's the thing though, processed meats aren't risky because you eat them once. They're risky because of how often they slip in without resistance, day after day. Thin slices, small portions, no alarm bells. And the label doesn't lie. It just doesn't tell you what repeated exposure actually does inside the body. That's what this video is about. Not panic, not guilt. But why certain processed meats behave very differently when they become everyday food. And why, once you see the pattern, you won't look at that packet the same way again. Here's a number most people never hear when they think about ham or bacon. The World Health Organization classifies processed meats as a Group 1 carcinogen, same category as tobacco. Not because eating a slice once is dangerous, but because regular consumption changes risk over time. And this is where most people misunderstand the problem. Australians don't eat processed meats in big dramatic amounts. They eat them often. Thin slices, small serves, normal meals. Breakfast here, lunchbox there. Sausages on repeat. The label won't warn you about frequency. It was never meant to. So today isn't about scaring you. It's about understanding what happens when something classified as safe quietly becomes daily food. Because once you see how this actually works, the list makes a lot more sense. So when we talk about risk, we're not talking about special occasions. We're talking about the foods that don't feel like a choice anymore. The ones already in the fridge, already sliced, already normal. That's where this list actually starts. Not with the worst looking product, but with the one people eat without even counting it. Number 6. Deli ham, sandwich ham. This is the one most people don't even count. It doesn't feel like processed meat. It feels thin, light, ordinary. Ham in a sandwich, ham with eggs, ham folded into a wrap, Coles, Woolworths, home brands, premium brands, different labels, same roll. Here's what usually gets missed. Deli ham isn't preserved the way people imagine preservation. It's not just salted meat. Most sandwich hams are wet cured. That means they're injected with a curing solution, water, salt, sugars, stabilizers, and then mechanically worked so the meat absorbs and holds that liquid. That's why it slices so cleanly. That's why it stays pink. That's why it doesn't behave like cooked meat at home. Look at the label, and you'll often see things like curing agents, mineral salts, antioxidants, stabilizers, nothing illegal, nothing hidden. But the label doesn't explain why those ingredients are there. Nitrite-based curing agents are used because they stop bacterial growth and keep color stable. That stability is exactly what makes ham safe to sell, and also what raises concern when exposure becomes frequent. Because nitrites don't just sit there. Inside the body, especially when combined with heat or stomach acid, nitrites can form N-nitroso compounds. That's not speculation. That's basic food chemistry. Now here's the part most people don't realize. You don't need a lot of ham for this to matter. The concern comes from repetition. A slice here, 2 slices there, day after day. Ham is often eaten cold, which makes people assume it's gentler, but cold doesn't mean inactive. The curing chemistry is already done before it reaches your fridge. And because ham is marketed as mild, protein-rich, and convenient, it quietly becomes a default, especially for kids' lunches. This is where I personally stopped seeing deli ham as just another protein, not because it's poison, not because it should never be eaten, but because it's one of the easiest processed meats to consume without ever noticing how often you're doing it. Thin slices don't feel like a decision. They feel like a habit. And habits are where processed meats stop being occasional and start becoming something else entirely. And this pattern doesn't stop with ham, because the next item on this list looks more honest. It's cooked, it's hot, it feels more real. But chemically, it creates a different, and in some ways louder, problem. Let's move on to number 5. Number 5, bacon. This one feels more honest. No one pretends bacon is health food. It's salty, smoky, you know it's indulgent, which is exactly why it slips past scrutiny. Because people think the risk is already priced in. Here's the problem with that logic. Bacon isn't just preserved. It's cured, smoked, and then usually cooked again at high heat. That combination matters more than most people realize. Cured meats already contain nitrites or nitrates. That's how color and microbial safety are controlled. But when bacon hits a hot pan, properly hot, something changes. High heat accelerates chemical reactions between nitrites, proteins, and fats. This is where nitrosamines become a real concern. Not hypothetically, mechanistically. Nitrosamines form most readily when cured meats are exposed to high temperatures, exactly how bacon is cooked in real kitchens. Crispy edges, rendered fat, repeated sizzling. And here's the part that gets overlooked. It's not just that nitrosamines can form. It's how often that exposure happens. Bacon isn't eaten once a year. It's weekends, breakfast routines, brunch culture. Just a couple of rashers, small amounts, but cooked hard, again and again. There's another layer too. Bacon is high in saturated fat, which isn't automatically a problem. But when fats are repeatedly heated, oxidized, and combined with curing byproducts, the metabolic load increases. You're not just digesting meat anymore. You're processing reaction products. And this is where a lot of people get confused. They think, I don't eat that much bacon. But the body doesn't measure risk by portion size alone. It responds to pattern, heat, frequency, chemical byproducts. That's why bacon shows up consistently in research, looking at processed meat risk. Not because it's dramatic, but because it combines curing plus high heat in a way few other foods do. This is where processed meat stops being passive. Ham sits quietly in a sandwich. Bacon reacts. And as we move further up this list, you'll notice something important. The more heat gets involved, the less forgiving the chemistry becomes. Because the next item isn't eaten cold. It's not optional. And in a lot of Australian homes, it's treated as a normal dinner. Let's move on to number 4. Number 4. Sausages. This is where things stop being individual cuts of meat. Sausages are different. They're not one piece, they're a system. Minced meat, fat, salt, seasonings, binders, all mixed together, then pushed into a casing and sold as something familiar. Barbecues, weeknight dinners, kids eat them without thinking twice. Here's the part that usually doesn't get discussed. When meat is minced, its surface area explodes. That matters. More surface area means more exposure to oxygen, heat, and curing agents if they're used. From a food chemistry point of view, minced meat reacts faster than whole cuts. Oxidation happens more easily. Additives interact more readily. That's before cooking even starts. Now look at how sausages are actually cooked. High heat, direct flame, pan frying until browned. That browning isn't just flavor, it's a chemical reaction, the Maillard reaction, which creates hundreds of new compounds. Some are harmless, some are not neutral. When sausages contain curing salts or added preservatives and they're cooked hard, you get overlapping reactions happening at once. Minced proteins, rendered fats, heat-driven reactions, all at the same time. And here's what most people miss. Sausages are rarely eaten occasionally. They're cheap, filling, easy, so they show up again and again. Different brands, different flavors, same structure. Even sausages marketed as premium or butcher style often rely on very similar formulations once you read past the front label. The ingredient list will usually include preservatives, antioxidants, binders, or fillers. Not because brands are being sneaky, but because sausages need to hold together, stay moist, and cook predictably. The problem isn't that these ingredients exist. It's that sausages combine minced structure, plus additives, plus high heat, and then get eaten as a normal repeat meal. This is where processed meat risk stops being theoretical. Not one sausage, not one barbecue, but the way sausages slide into the weekly routine without resistance. You don't remember how often you ate them. You just remember that they were easy. And that's exactly why sausages sit this high on the list. Because once meat is minced, mixed, and cooked hot, the margin for neutral gets much smaller. And the next item? It doesn't even require cooking to cause concern. It's already been cooked once, sometimes twice, and most people still think of it as the safest option in the fridge. Let's move on to number 3. Quick pause. Just for a second. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, not opinions, not food trends, just what actually happens between the label and your body, that's exactly what this channel exists for. Subscribing here doesn't mean agreeing with everything. It just means you want to understand what you're eating a bit better than most people do. All right, back to the list. Number 3, pre-cooked sausages and Frankfurts. This is where processing stops being something you do at home. It's already been done for you. Frankfurts, hot dogs, pre-cooked sausages, boiled, steamed, stabilized, packaged. They feel safer because they're controlled. Uniform, already cooked. But that's exactly the point. These products are designed to survive multiple stages: industrial cooking, cooling, packaging, refrigeration, reheating at home. Every stage requires stability. And stability in processed meat doesn't come from simplicity. It comes from formulation. Look at the label and you'll often see curing salts, phosphates, stabilizers, antioxidants. Again, legal, approved, expected. But here's what changes the equation. When meat is cooked, cooled, and then reheated, the chemistry doesn't reset. Proteins denature, fats oxidize, preservatives interact differently, especially when reheating happens quickly: microwave, pan, grill. This is why pre-cooked processed meats are treated differently in food science than fresh cuts, not because they're worse, but because they've already been pushed through thermal stress before they ever reach your kitchen. And here's the subtle behavioral part. People eat these more often because they're fast, because they feel safe, because there's no raw meat anxiety. One Frankfurt doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a solution. That's what moves it higher on this list. Not drama. Design. Short educational block. Why frequency changes. Everything. Here's something most labels will never explain. The body doesn't respond to food like a courtroom. It doesn't judge guilt or innocence. It responds to patterns. Small exposures, repeated often, can matter more than a single large one. That's especially true with compounds formed during processing and heating. Your liver doesn't care if something was only a little bit today if it was also there yesterday and the day before. This is why processed meats are studied differently than occasional indulgences. Not because people eat too much in one sitting, but because these foods are built to fit daily routines. Sandwiches, quick dinners, leftovers, kids' meals. Nothing feels excessive until you step back and realize how rarely the body gets a break from the same exposure. That's the thread connecting everything on this list so far, and now we're about to cross it. Because the next item doesn't look engineered. It looks sliced, simple, clean. Most people think it's the safest processed meat they buy, and that assumption is exactly why it lands at No. 2. Let's move on. No. 2. Sliced turkey and lean deli meats. This is where people usually push back, because this one feels responsible. Turkey, lean, lower fat, high protein. It's the processed meat people switch to, not away from. Gym bags, work lunches, kids' sandwiches when parents are trying to do better. And honestly, on the surface, it looks like progress. But here's the uncomfortable part. Most sliced turkey in the deli aisle isn't just cooked turkey. It's restructured meat, which means the muscle has been broken down, mixed, reshaped, and set again. That's why the slices are perfect. Same color, same thickness, same bite, every time. Real cooked turkey doesn't behave like that. To get that consistency, manufacturers rely on added proteins, binding agents, curing salts, moisture retainers, not because they're hiding something, because otherwise the product falls apart. Now, here's where the tone shifts. The issue with sliced turkey isn't that it's aggressive. It's that it's quiet. No smoke, no sizzling pan, no obvious indulgence, which means people eat it more often. 5 days a week, sometimes twice a day. Cold, straight from the packet. And cold foods feel inactive. But the chemistry doesn't turn off just because the product isn't hot. Curing agents are still there. Preservation reactions already happened before you bought it. The body still has to process what processing already did. This is the point where I had to stop thinking in terms of better and worse. Because sliced turkey isn't replacing bacon. It's replacing nothing. It's being added. Another sandwich, another wrap, another default protein. That's why it sits here. Not because it's the most reactive, not because it tastes indulgent, but because it's the easiest processed meat to eat without ever feeling like you're eating processed meat at all. And that's a dangerous place for any food to land, because once something feels invisible, frequency stops being questioned. And the last item on this list? It's invisible in a different way. It doesn't look processed. It doesn't look engineered. Most people don't even think of it as processed meat, which is exactly why it's number one. Number one. Everyday minced meat, prepackaged. This one usually surprises people because most Australians don't even put it in the same category. Minced meat doesn't feel processed. It feels basic, raw, honest. You buy it fresh, you cook it yourself, you season it at home. So how could this possibly sit above bacon or deli meats? Here's the part that changes everything. Processing isn't just about additives. It's about structure. When meat is minced, you're not just changing its shape. You're changing how it behaves. Minced meat has vastly more surface area than whole cuts, which means more exposure to oxygen, more fat contact, faster chemical change, even before you cook it. Now think about how minced meat is actually used. High heat, quick browning, often cooked until dry. That browning, the color people chase, is another intense chemical reaction. Again, not automatically bad, but not neutral either. And here's where the frequency part hits hard. Minced meat is cheap, versatile, comfort food, spaghetti, tacos, burgers, meat sauces, week after week. So while each meal feels normal, the body keeps dealing with the same pattern. Oxidized fats, heat-driven protein reactions, repeated exposure, nothing extreme, just consistent. And there's one more layer most people miss. Packaged minced meat is often older than it looks. Grinding accelerates spoilage, so it's handled, chilled, and moved quickly. But not instantly. Antioxidants and controlled atmospheres are often used upstream to slow visible change. Again, legal, standard, expected. But it means the meat you're cooking has already been pushed closer to its chemical limits than a whole cut would be. This is where the list connects. Not with fear, with logic. The foods that cause the most concern aren't always the ones that look the worst. They're the ones eaten most often, prepared the fastest, and questioned the least. Minced meat isn't a villain, but when it becomes the backbone of everyday dinners, the body doesn't experience it as just food. It experiences repetition, and repetition is the common thread running through everything you've seen so far. That's the real takeaway. Not never eat this, not throw it all out. Just this. When something becomes normal enough to disappear, that's when it deserves a closer look. Practical alternatives. Where it actually matters. This isn't about becoming restrictive. It's about choosing less aggressive versions of the same habit. Swap cured deli meats for freshly cooked leftovers, roast chicken, baked fish, or slow-cooked meat used cold behaves very differently from nitrite-cured ham or turkey slices. Limit cured meats to occasions, not defaults. Bacon, Frankfurts, and sausages work best as occasional foods, not weekly anchors. When buying sausages, look for uncured and short labels, fewer additives, no added nitrites, and visible meat texture, not perfect uniformity. Avoid pre-cooked, reheat-ready meats as daily food. Cooking once at home is different from eating something cooked, cooled, stabilized, and reheated again. These aren't health hacks. They're exposure controls. Same meals, same routines, just fewer chemical shortcuts doing the heavy lifting every day. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's not a rule. It's a lens. Processed meats don't cause problems because they exist. They cause problems when they become invisible. When something is sliced, cured, pre-cooked, and ready by default, frequency takes over, without anyone noticing. Nothing on the label warns you about that. It was never designed to. This isn't about fear, and it's not about perfection. It's about seeing patterns clearly enough to interrupt them, before they quietly become normal. If this made you rethink even one food you eat on autopilot, that's the point of this channel. If you want more investigations like this, based on labels, processing, and how food actually behaves, subscribe. And one item on this list surprised you more than the others. Tell me which one in the comments. Not to debate, just to notice. We'll take it from there.